Hey there, all my awesome Algebra 1 students. So today I need to teach you about something that's called the zero product property, and you're actually going to use this property a lot in Algebra 2 next year. So this is definitely something that you need to understand, and it's going to help us solve some equations starting on Friday. So I have some guided notes ready to go for you, and if you have a printer, I did attach a PDF copy of these notes and put them in the week 4 folder on Schoology. So if you would like to print them out and fill it out as you go, that's perfectly fine. Otherwise, just write as you go on your paper like normal. So let's dive into this. So the first thing we're going to do today is we are going to consider the equation y equals a times b. And we're going to complete this table for these indicated values. So we're looking at y equals a times b, and the very first values are for a, they want us to use 0, for b, -2. So y would be equal to a is 0 times b, which is -2. So what's 0 times -2? 0. All right, the next one, y is equal to, again for a, they want 0 times -1. So what's 0 times -1? 0. Then for a they want 0, b they want 2, so y is equal to 0 times 2, which is again 0. A is 0, b is 10, y is equal to 0 times 10, which is 0. So looking at this very last part of the table, they kind of switched it up here. So we're left with y is 0. Well, how would we get 0 if we use the equation y equals something times 5? So obviously b is 5, that we plug that in for b. What would we plug in for a to multiply by 5 and end up with 0? Well, a must be 0. Is 0 times 5 0? Yes. So we know we're correct. So what pattern do we notice from this table? Well, I noticed a couple patterns. I noticed that a was always 0. I also noticed that y always ended up being 0. And anytime I multiplied that 0 times any number for b, no matter what b was, I always ended up with y equals 0. When a is equal to 0, what is the equation always equal to? So anytime we plug in a equals 0, so y is equal to 0 times b, well, what's 0 times anything? 0. So y is always going to equal 0. Is there any b value that will change this y or y not? So is there anything we could plug into this equation for b, anything we could replace it with, any value that times 0, we won't get 0? Well, I can't think of anything, and you probably can't either. So the reason why is because anytime you multiply something by 0, you always get 0 for the product. All right, so let's move on to number 2. So for number 2, I want you to go ahead and pause the video, answer these questions, fill out this table, and then come back, press play, and check your answers with mine. All right, so hopefully you have this all filled out already, and let's double check what you got. So in the equation, if you plug in -5 times 0, you should have gotten 0. You multiplied 1 times 0, you should get 0. Multiply 12 times 0, you still get 0. And if you multiply 27 by 0, you definitely get 0. So now down here, oops, sorry, it says 14 for a, blank for b, y equals 14 times some number, and they got 0 for y. So what would they have plugged in for b to multiply by 14 to get 0? Well, they would have plugged in 0. So what patterns did you notice? Well, I noticed that b was always equal to 0, and y was always equal to 0 as well. When b equals 0, what is the equation always equal to? 0. Is there any value that will ever change this? So when y is equal to a times b, if we plug in 0 for b, what are we always going to get for y? 0. So if I multiply anything, any number a by 0, I'm always going to get 0. So no value of a. We'll change this. Anything times 0 has a product of 0. Oops. All right, so now we're going to do number 3. So we're going to consider the quadratic function y equals x squared minus 5x minus 6. So this is a quadratic function. We've dealt with quadratic expressions, and now we're going to be using them in equations where we set them equal to y, and you're going to learn how to solve for y starting tomorrow, actually, in Friday's lesson. So what we're going to do with this equation is we are going to take y equals x squared minus 5x minus 6, and we're going to plug in x equals 6. So y is equal to, we're going to take 6 squared minus 5 times 6 minus 6. So y is equal to 6 squared is 36, negative 5 times 6 is negative 30, minus 6. So then y is equal to 36 minus 30 is 6, and then 6 minus 6 is 0. So when I plug in x equals 6, I get y equals 0. Interesting. Now we're going to take the same equation, and this time we're going to plug in x equals negative 1. So y is equal to negative 1 squared minus 5 times negative 1 minus 6. So all I've done is taken the x's and replaced them with the value of negative 1. Negative 1 squared is positive 1. Negative 5 times negative 1 is positive 5. Minus 6. We'll see, we get 1 plus 5 is 6, and then 6 minus 6 is equal to 0. Interesting. So the x values, x equals 6 and x equals negative 1, both made this equation 0. We're going to talk about why that's so interesting even further in depth later on throughout this unit. So now in part C, we're going to take y equals x squared minus 5x minus 6. We're going to plug in 0 for y, and we're going to factor the equation. So 0 is equal to, we're going to factor this thing. So let's take factors of 6. And decide which ones are going to add or subtract to get us that negative 5 and a negative 6 when we multiply. Well, hey, I already know that x times x is x squared. And then I'm going to use 1 and 6 because I need a negative when I multiply. So that means only one of these two numbers can be negative. To get negative 5 when we add, both of them, both 2 and 3 would have to be negative, so that's not going to work for us. So we're going to have 1 and 6. I need negative 5 when I add them, so I want negative 6 and positive 1. So now with that factored form, we have 0 is equal to x plus 1 and x minus 6 being multiplied by each other. We're going to plug in x equals 6 into this factored form. So 0 is equal to 6 plus 1 times 6 minus 6. Well, what does that do to one of these factors? Which of these factors does 6 make 0? Well, 6 minus 6 is 0. So x equals 6 makes the factor x minus 6 equals 0. So 0 is equal to 6 plus 1 is 7 times 6 minus 6 is 0. Well, wait, what's 7 times 0? 0. So that means that we're left with 0 equals 0. Is that a true statement? Yes, it is. So when you simplify the equation completely, do you end up with a true statement? Is 0 equal to 0? Yes, it is. Interesting. So that x value, x equals 6, made one of our factors equal 0. And when we plugged it into the original equation without the factors, it made the equation equal to 0 up here too. Interesting indeed. All right, so part E. Now we're going to do the same thing. We're going to take our factored form, and we're going to plug in x equals -1. So 0 equals x plus 1 times x minus 6, and this time we're going to replace x with -1. And what does that make one of the factors? Well, check it out. What's -1 plus 1? 0. And so we're going to have 0 times whatever this is. What's 0 times anything? 0. So we're going to end up with a true statement even if we don't simplify the second factor. But we'll simplify it just for fun. What's -1 minus 6? -7. All right. So x equals -1 makes the factor x plus 1 equals 0. And we do end up with a true statement. Very interesting. So now let's think about the equation y equals a times b, that equation that we started with in the first place, with y equals something times something. And we're going to compare it to this equation, y equals x squared minus 5x minus 6. So let's rewrite y equals x squared minus 5x minus 6 in its factored form. So y is equal to x plus 1 times x minus 6. Now compare that factored form to a times b. So how does that compare to a times b? Do we have something times something, a times b? Yes, we do. So that makes a x plus 1, and that makes b x minus 6, those factors. If either a equals 0 or b equals 0, then what will y equal? And y equals a times b. If a is 0 or b is 0, what is y? 0. If either factor of y equals x squared minus 5x minus 6 is 0, what will y be? So if either factor, here's my factors, are 0, if x plus 1 is equal to 0, like if our a is 0 times our b, x minus 6 is 0, what is y always going to be? Y will always equal 0. Because anything times 0 has a product of 0. And I'm going to challenge you, if you don't remember what the word product means, Google it real quick. All right, so that brings us to the zero product property. You actually just discovered the zero product property by going through this lesson with me. We kind of just stumbled upon it. If y is equal to a times b, and if either a or b are 0, then y will equal 0. So I'm actually going to rewrite this and use the formal definition. So it looks like if a times b equals 0, then what does that tell you about a or b? A or B must be equal to 0. And we're going to use this property a lot to help us solve quadratic equations and help us graph them as well as we move through the rest of the semester. All right. See you guys later.